Well, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. This is our third stream event that we are hosting here on LinkedIn, and will appear on other places as well, including YouTube and our new podcast, which I'll tell you about in a second. But today we are talking all about the role of the privacy officer. What does it mean? Who should it be? And everything related to that subject. So we're going to talk all about that. And I'm joined by my guest today, who is Emma Pond from Simply Privacy. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, Phil.
Nice to have you on the show. Look, we had your colleague Davin just the other week tell us all about privacy as well. So this is a particularly strong theme for us at the moment. Emma is also a principal and director at Simply Privacy. And Simply Privacy is a small consultancy which offers solutions to business, government, and the NGO sector. Emma even used to work at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, so she really knows this stuff. I think that's pretty cool. And welcome, Emma. It's really nice to have you here and to talk all about this role of the privacy officer.
Oh, very happy to. Love talking privacy.
That's your topic, definitely. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Phil. I run Onwardly, which is a small startup helping other businesses build, manage, and scale their security and privacy programs. So we're really trying to help make this stuff accessible for people and available in a way that hasn't been done before. So hence we're talking all about security, we're talking about privacy, and we're talking about some topics related to that, which includes technical leadership and life and startup culture as well. So all good fun. Please leave some questions and comments for us in the chat below. We'd love to hear from you. Even if we can't answer them straight away, we can come back and answer them at a later date as well. So please, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think and any hairy curly questions you have for us as well. We will do our best to answer those. So as mentioned, we're actually releasing this as a podcast as well. So we have a new podcast that's called Upwards, and to sort of play on the theme. So these fireside chats that we do once a week or so will be released in the podcast format, which you can subscribe to through wherever you get your podcasts, and will also be on our YouTube channel as well. So you can listen to us 3 times as much, which I'm sure everyone would love to do. So Emma, tell us all about the privacy officer. What exactly is a privacy officer?
Okay, well, in New Zealand, under the Privacy Act, everyone that's covered by the Privacy Act has to have someone in their organisation that is the privacy officer. So it's a statutory role, and it can be someone that's doing other things as well. It doesn't have to be like a standalone position, but it is a thing that the law requires you to have. So it's a must, not a nice to have.
So we've got to have it. We've all got to have it. Is that does every company? What if you don't have one already? What's the process for appointing a privacy officer?
Well, most people get volunteered into the role.
Right.
So ideally, you want someone that is keen and has an interest in the area. But you may not necessarily always find that, because it's often a role that people look at a bit suspiciously. They might think they don't know how to do it, or they might think, oh, I'm busy enough, or all the rest of it. So it's probably, I would suggest, have a look around and see someone who's got an interest for starters, and then go from there.
And I imagine that, companies of any size, you would need, obviously they need this. And it might be, if you're a very small company, it could just well be the owner and founder or the managing director, but if you're a larger company who typically fulfills that role, is there any one particular type of function that's often the privacy officer, or is it really just case by case?
It moves around a bit. It often depends on what the organisation's main sort of function is. If they're got a really big customer sort of service approach, then it could be someone in that area of the business. If they're a B2B company, it could be someone in HR, because probably the biggest thing they have to worry about is employee personal information. Often it sits in the legal team, if there is a legal team, or maybe risk, that sort of area. But yeah, it kind of goes in lots of different places, really. It doesn't have to sit anywhere in particular. One thing I probably would add to, who should be the role, where should it sit in the organisation, is that it's important for the privacy officer to have a little bit of influence in the organisation. They need to be able to get things done that need to be done, or have the ability to talk across the business. So it can be really really good thing to do is to make it sit in the sort of senior leadership level if you have that kind of bigger organization, so that there's someone at the top table who who's on the line if something goes wrong, basically, therefore might take it a bit more seriously.
That's probably quite a good segue into the next question, actually, is that what does a privacy officer do? And you mentioned that they, it's helpful if they're somewhat senior in the company and they have some influence. So tell us a little bit about what the roles and responsibilities of the privacy officer are.
Yeah, well, there's basically the subject matter expert in the business for privacy. They're the one you go to with your tricky privacy questions. They're the one that if you had to liaise with the privacy commissioner about a complaint or a privacy breach or something, that's part of their role. They're also kind of the cheerleader. They're kind of doing the training and the awareness activities, making sure that the rest of the people in the organisation know what privacy means for them in their role and what they should be sort of doing and thinking about. So it's a really varied job. I think one of the things that makes a really good privacy officer is someone that's a good communicator and works well with other people. It's like a school report, isn't it? But someone that can talk to people across the organisation, be approachable, be pragmatic, be someone that people want to come and get some advice from, as opposed to a computer says no kind of approach, which sometimes you do.
Indeed. And so with a lot of folks who are listening to this will be from companies that, are sort of startup-y focused or tech companies. Not everyone, but some of them will be. And when it comes to building software, we often will collect, personal information, some more than others. How should a privacy officer interact with people who are building software, if they're either the person that's building it or if they're not necessarily the same person that's building it? How is that approach typically taken?
Well, how it works best is if that interaction happens early as possible in the design and planning kind of phase. As a privacy officer, it's a very sort of frustrating experience to be brought in at the end of a development or a project where you've basically just been asked to give it a privacy tick. Because if there is an issue, it's going to be quite an expensive and painful process to sort out potentially. So the idea is that you engage with your privacy officer, think about privacy right at the beginning of your development so that you can think about whether there are any things you need to worry about, any risks, and what you can do to, get rid of them, mitigate them, accept them, whatever you want to do. But you're going in with your eyes open and not building something that you then have to possibly get in and rip apart a little bit down the track if it hasn't incorporated the privacy things it needs to.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's the same principle as software is expensive, and so the changes in the design phase, and not the sort of deployment phase or the final sign off, because it's really expensive to change your mind later on. Many people may not think that way, have maybe not used to thinking about, incorporating privacy into the design and planning phases of software. How do people actually sort of do that? What are some practical tools they might use, at a high level to think, to do privacy work at that sort of design phase?
Well, it can be as simple as just having, building into your process a checklist to think about, the main privacy things, like, are we collecting personal information in this tool that we're making? If we are we telling people? Do we know what we're going to do with it? Are we telling people that? Have we figured out where we're going to store it and how long we're going to keep it? Have we built it so that we can get rid of it when we don't need it anymore? Just a really simple checklist like that, maybe 7 or 8 questions. And depending on how you answer those, you'll either identify that it might be something to think about a bit more. You might think, oh, sweet, good, carry on. And so I think it doesn't have to be bigger than Ben Hur at that initial stage. It just has to be thought about, and that's often all it takes is, have we thought about privacy? Oh, yeah, and then you can go down that path.
Indeed. And, information ends up in lots of weird and wonderful places, as we know, with our software stack. So giving some consideration and thought to that in the design phase, it might not be readily apparent to everyone that, we have personal information ending up in our bug tracking or our, our crash report software or our payment system over here, and it actually gets stashed in quite a few places. giving some care and consideration to what's been collected and where that's going.
Yeah.
Also always a worthwhile activity to do. Okay, is that the same thing as jumping ahead a little bit here? Is that the same thing as a privacy impact assessment, or is that different?
It's kind of the same thing. It's just, I mean, a privacy impact assessment is basically that it's looking at a change process and going, well, what are the privacy risks and what can we do about them? So privacy impact assessment can sound kind of formal and big and tedious, and obviously they can end up like that, but you don't have to do that full on in-depth thing every time, all the time. You know, a simple kind of threshold assessment at the beginning should be enough to steer you in the right direction. And depending on what you're building and what you're actually doing, you might need to do more. But something short and snappy at the beginning is a good way, because then people will do it as well. Often if you see these quite elaborate privacy impact assessment processes that are set up and nobody really wants to do them, and they kind of get
through the dry.
Yeah.
Yeah, done too often, indeed. Indeed. Yeah. I think that is a really good point you make, is that, you know, particularly in the startup world, things have to be hyper pragmatic for them to be done. And so I like your approach of, you know, asking a couple of those key questions up front, incorporating them into the cycle of how we build things in our company.
And you keep thinking about them too. You don't just go, right, privacy tick, thought about that, you know, and sort of 7 or 8, 9, 10 weeks later, you've changed direction quite a lot. You have to kind of potentially check in again and go, oh, we're doing something different now. Okay. So you build that in as well.
I think they stay the same forever. So it's an ongoing practice, and it becomes part of the muscle memory of
exactly.
Kind of one. We did one, you know, 3 years ago, and we're great. You know,
on the shelf.
A lot changed in that time.
Yeah.
Okay. What are our obligations under the law and our obligations regarding personal information we keep or could keep in the future?
In terms of retention?
Yeah.
Well, because that's a good one to think about right at the beginning of a project or a development, because lots of times we sort of see things get built that you can't actually then delete information out of, and that is important, because in terms of what the Privacy Act says here in New Zealand and Privacy Acts around the world generally, you know, there might be certain laws saying you've got to keep certain kinds of information for minimum periods, like tax 7 years, you know, health 10 years, those sorts of things. But then after that, if it's personal information, you're only allowed to keep it under the Privacy Act if you've got basically a sort of valid purpose, and that's linked to the reason you got it from in the first place. So basically, you just can't keep everything forever unless you can justify it.
Indeed. So I can imagine if the nature of your product changes, or your service changes, and you no longer need that, you know, perhaps some information you've collected in the past, it's actually important to think about how you get rid of that information and not just hold it forever.
Yeah, it's just a hygiene thing as much as anything, and it can cost you money to store stuff you don't need, and it can become a risk if you don't need it and it's just hanging out. It might just be subject to a data breach, and then, you know, that's a problem you didn't need to have.
Indeed. And in terms of data breaches, I understand that that's the role of the privacy officer is the one that's meant to report that breach. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're the point person in terms of dealing with the regulator. That they're part of their obligation under the Privacy Act is to be that liaison person. So that includes things like reporting privacy breaches once they hit the threshold that requires them, you know, serious breaches. But, you know, in terms of how you want to manage that within your organisation about whose decision that is about notifying, that can be their decision or somebody else's if that's not set in the law.
Yeah, cool.
Nobody
Very cool.
wants to make that decision.
No one wants to stick their hand up. Okay, so the message is really, if you don't have a privacy officer appointed, then you should. It's not necessarily a big scary thing. Just somebody who's reasonably has some level of authority and influence, who thinks that, you know, is likely to, their skills are well suited to this sort of role as a good candidate. And then start to think about really incorporating some of that privacy thinking early and often into the business. So maybe you write software, maybe you don't. But just about everybody collects PII or personal information somewhere, somehow in their business, and it inevitably ends up in some systems that you control.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's often really good to build privacy thinking into procurement processes as well, because you might not be building the thing, but you might be, licensing or buying the app that will help your business do cool things, but that requires you to share personal information with it, or let them have access to your customer database or whatever. So you need to think about it in that context as well, because that's where a lot of privacy breaches can happen, is through third parties that you're normally responsible for.
Indeed. So it might not be you that has the breach personally, but it's a provider that you use, which has information that you've collected and put in that system.
Yeah, and that you're in the gun for that in terms of liability. So really important to think about privacy when you're engaging those ones as well.
Yep, indeed. Just because it's someone else's system doesn't mean you're not responsible.
Nope.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other areas where you sometimes see companies getting this wrong, in terms of, maybe not thinking far ahead enough, or collecting the wrong sorts of information, or any other common points that you see where companies might commonly some common failure scenarios here?
Not communicating to people what they're doing. So not having a nice, transparent approach to personal information collection. That's a good thing. Builds trust, builds good vibes with your customer database if they can sort of see what you're doing. So that's an area I think lots of businesses could do better at. Another thing that organisations can do, in an effort to sort of, the intentions might be good, but it doesn't really work in terms of the private sector, is just try and collect stuff that they might need in the future. So, ask lots of questions, get lots of information, just in case it might be useful in the future, but not really knowing what you're going to do with it at the moment. That's not consistent with your obligations under the Privacy Act. So you need to think about what you're trying to achieve and only collect the information that you need to do that. So requires a bit more discipline there, maybe.
Indeed, and that goes hand in hand with collection notices as well, doesn't it? So being just upfront, we're collecting for all these reasons. The people should know what's being collected, why it's being collected, and there's an ethical obligation on our part to only collect what we need, and do the right thing with that information. Even to the point where people may give you consent, doesn't mean you sort of have just total free reign with their data in any form, does it? So thinking about that all.
Yeah, consent is nobody ever reads the privacy statement. Nobody ever really reads anything. So if you are doing something that is going to be surprising to people with the information you're collecting, you really need to. The onus is on you to make them aware of what you're going to be doing, which also might require a bit more than just a hyperlink through to some long privacy statement.
Indeed. Well, look, we're a little bit compressed on time today, so we'll leave it there. But thank you, Emma. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show to hear your experience with this, and to help make it accessible and simple for people to approach. Sometimes this stuff can seem a little hard to understand. What does this all mean? But hopefully, some folks have got some useful tidbits out of today. We'll be sort of republishing these bits and pieces on the web as well. So thank you. Thanks for your time. It's great to have you as a guest here. Always a pleasure. And we'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you.